What's your downright scariest real-life story? Story 1. I always parked in a certain spot at my last job for the 12 years I was there. It was accessible to the public as it wasn't company parking, but they wanted us to park in the back of the lot so the closer spots could be available for customers. One day my spot was taken by a dark-tinted caddy, and I was immediately annoyed because everyone knew it was mine. It was morning shift, so 4 a.m., and it couldn't be one of the others because I knew what they drove. So maybe a newbie? Or another employee from another shop in the plaza? It was still there on my lunch break, and again when I went home. And the next day I came in at 1 p.m. till close, around 9:30. And then also the next day. Something about it really bothered me. It smelled wrong. Literally, it's the South, high summer, and who knows what's baking in there. My dad was a Marine, then a police officer. He always said if you feel something is wrong, there probably is. So I dialed the non-emergency police number. I felt ridiculous, but every time I walked by, it bugged me. So I waited for over an hour before anyone showed up. And honestly, if I hadn't been off the next day, I probably would have said forget it. But I waited, mostly because I can be a really petty person, and that was my spot, period. The police showed up clearly annoyed, probably expecting another "they can't park here" call. But they ran the license plate, and then things went crazy. They wanted my info, asked me to contact my manager, asked if the lot had cameras, if I'd touched the car, etc. Apparently, the car was part of an active Amber Alert. It was the last known location of a missing person, a 15-year-old girl. When they popped the trunk, they found her body under a blanket. She had been murdered. That was the smell. She had gone out with her much older, controlling boyfriend and tried to end the relationship. She made the mistake of getting into the car with him. He drove 3 counties over, tortured her, left her in the trunk, and just walked away. I never learned her exact time of death, and it haunts me sometimes thinking maybe she could have been saved if I had called sooner. So yeah, listen to your gut, even when it seems petty. Story 2. I used to sleepwalk when I was a child. We lived in a rough neighborhood, Decatur, Georgia, and I would wake up outside in the middle of the night, not knowing how I got there, and would have to walk home and re-enter through the darkened doorway I had left wide open for whoever might be lurking around. But the time that scared me the most was when I was about 9 years old. I woke up to find myself standing with the bedroom curtains pulled back, staring out the window. As I became aware, I noticed a very large and completely hairless man, no hair, no eyebrows, staring at me and slowly inching closer to the window and to my face. He looked confused, like he wasn't sure what he was seeing. At that moment, I realized what was going on and started screaming uncontrollably, frozen in place and peeing down my leg. The man freaked out, screamed, did some kind of tumbling move, and ran off in a weird zigzag motion, like he was dodging bullets. My mom woke up and thought I had just had a nightmare. The next morning, we found a screwdriver on the front porch and damage to the door frame and handle. I still almost pee my pants when I tell that story, but now it's usually from laughing. I'll never forget the look on his face when I started screaming, or his high-pitched scream, or the way he ducked and rolled all the way down the street. Story 3. I was with a guy for a couple of years when I realized he had taken up smoking meth as a hobby after work. We had a lot of problems already, and I had 3 small kids, so I finally kicked him out. A few days later, maybe a week, he created a fake Facebook page and sent me a friend request. The only posts on the page were about killing me and my children, his suis, and how he planned to do it that day. The most recent post was accompanied by a selfie taken in my backyard. A recent one, so he had been there. I was on my way home with the kids late in the evening when I saw the request. I had stopped by my parents' house the day before and picked up my dad's 9mm handgun because the guy had been sending messages through mutual friends about burning my house down. I called the police as soon as I got home, but they didn't seem to think it was urgent and said they didn't have anyone available to check the house. I live out in the woods and the local police force is tiny. Anyway, I made the kids stay in the car. I gave my oldest instructions on what to do if anything happened, and I had to sweep my own home, in the dark, with a 9mm. Just in case he was inside waiting for me and my children. It was terrifying. For a while after that, I had to check the house every time we came home. I was constantly afraid that one day I'd find him inside. The police were called multiple times, and eventually I was granted a restraining order a few weeks later when the death threats continued. He passed away about a year ago, and all I felt was relief. Story 4. When I first learned that some of the nicest people out there can be dealing with terrible demons. When I was younger, around second or third grade, I had a math tutor at the time. She was my mom's friend from AA. I didn't really understand it at the time. She was a really nice lady, and the reason I'm so good at math even to this day. One of the days she was supposed to come over, my mother couldn't get a hold of her, so my mom got concerned and we took a ride over to check on her to see if she was okay. When we got to her place, we found her so drunk, laying on the floor and unable to stand. My mom had to call an ambulance. Later that day, my mom had to explain to me what happened and that she had passed away. That day taught me that no matter how good things look on the outside for some people, the demons on the inside could just be moments away from taking them. Story 5. I was active duty in the Navy, served aboard a submarine. We were in port one day, most of the crew had left. The guys on duty for the night, that's us, were given permission to bring our kids on board for dinner. Halfway through the meal, someone made a 4MC announcement. 4MC is the emergency announcement intercom. It said there was light smoke in the engine room, quickly followed by fire in the engine room. We trained for this stuff religiously, so everyone was immediately in action. The commanding officer was still there, but topside. One of our senior enlisted guys apparently ran the kids up front to a hatch where he was, quite literally, throwing them through the hatch as our CO caught them and set them on the deck topside. The rest of us ran toward the fire, and I noticed no one was grabbing a mask. Not one person. So I grabbed a big handful of breathing masks and followed through the hatch, where we were greeted by what appeared to be light smoke filling the entire engine room. But it didn't smell like smoke. It was sweet, tasted sweet. An oil pump had blown and filled the entire back half of the boat with atomized hydraulic fluid. A guy was moments from lighting a torch in the engine room as the casualty was called. Had it been called just a moment later, we'd have walked into an inferno. Had he for some reason not heard it called and lit the torch after we'd run in, we'd have been on fire before we could react. It turned out perfectly fine. We cleaned the oil that clung to all the surfaces and fixed the pump. But it was somewhat surreal, understanding just how close we were to a wildly different result. Story 6. I was rushing to a lab class, had books in one hand, lunch in the other, and attempted to walk downstairs into the lab. Except the steps were old cement steps with metal lips, and the tip of my foot caught the lip. I went head first, never touched anything the entire way down until I landed on my neck against the wall at the bottom of the stairs. I felt my entire weight load into my neck, and every single vertebra popped. I knew I was dead. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. Everyone rushed out of the lab to see what happened. Apparently it was loud. I was 300 pounds at the time. And then all of a sudden, the breath rushed back into my lungs and I could breathe and move. I got up. It felt miraculous. I ended up with occasional severe back pain that eventually went away after 18 months or so. Story 7. When I was 17, my mom's husband had a mental breakdown and attempted to kill her. I was recovering from knee surgery at the time, but still ran from my room to see what was going on. My baby brother, who was 4 at the time, was in the room while he was choking and stomping on her. I took him out of the room and told my other siblings to leave the house and get someone to call the cops. I had to tackle him to get him off her and pinned him up against the washer and dryer, yelling at her to leave. I tried to lock him in their room so I could leave the house and look for my siblings, but he just pushed me and went into the kitchen to grab a knife. He was trying to hurt himself because in the small time frame, I had called the cops. While on the phone, he looked me in the eyes and started to cut himself, then locked himself in the bathroom since he figured he would be arrested if he stayed. What scared me the most was how calm he was when he said, "She's cheating on me, so if I can't have her, no one else will," as I was screaming at him. I have no idea how I got him off her because he was 6'3" and over 300 pounds. I'm 21 now, and to this day I get jumpy around knives and panic when I don't hear from my mom after she leaves the house. Story 8. A year ago, I was hospitalized with an infection in my right lower leg. They drew a line a few inches below my knee and said if the infection spread past that line, I'd lose my leg below the knee. They pumped me full of antibiotics and it seemed to work. I had to finish my antibiotics regimen at a nearby rehab hospital. The day before I was transferred, my roommate and I were eating breakfast. He was an older gentleman, And when he slept, he made a weird gurgling noise. He told a passing nutritionist that his breakfast should have come with 2 coffees. I heard that same gurgling noise at the foot of his bed, behind the curtain that separated us. This was still during COVID. I was about to call a nurse when one ran in, asking if he was okay. The guy was coding. All of a sudden, our room had nurses and a doctor rushing in to save him. It was controlled chaos, procedures and medications being called out. One nurse kept track of everything on a laptop. I couldn't go anywhere. I was in the bed closest to the window. They kept pushing me closer to the window so more people could help him. They worked on him for over an hour. They called the time of death shortly after. The doctor asked for a moment of silence. He saw me sitting up in my bed and came over and asked if I was all right. I said I was, even though I had tears in my eyes. Other nurses kept checking if I needed anything. These people took time to see if I was okay after what I had just witnessed. I asked one of the nurses to open the window a bit. She smiled and understood what I meant. It was a sunny day and very peaceful outside the window. Even now, typing this out a year later, it brings tears to my eyes. I heard someone's final words on this earth. "Excuse me, miss, but my breakfast was supposed to come with 2 coffees." Story 9. A few years ago, when I still lived at home with my mom in Philly, someone tried breaking into our house. I looked through the window next to the door and saw 2 men wearing ski masks staring back at me. One with some type of pipe or tool, and the other with a gun pointed right at me. I bolted away from the door, grabbed my dad's 10 gauge and stood in the bathroom doorway while I called 911. They ended up running and were caught down the road by the police. They had multiple warrants each for break-ins in Maryland and Delaware, one of which left a father of 2 shot in the spine and paralyzed. I'm still thankful to this day that I wasn't harmed during that. Story 10. Late 80s to early 90s in Northern Ireland. I was a kid, around 7 or 8. The sun was shining, and it was sometime in the early afternoon. My dad needed to return a library book on Crumlin Road, a Protestant East Shon Loyalist area in Belfast. We were Catholics, and Crumlin Road was notoriously dangerous at the time, still is to a lesser extent. So I was already a little on edge, just knowing the reputation of the place. My dad seemed cool though, wasn't worried. It's not like we had Catholic printed on our foreheads, but he did say I needed to pretend to have a different name if anyone asked. My name clearly marked me as Catholic, so I adopted a Protestant name for the trip. We came to a road leading to an intersection. Across it was a Catholic Republican enclave called Ardoyne Road. We were headed right, down a long winding path. But up the road near the intersection, we saw a group of men. One of them was running back and forth across the street, relaying information. Some stared toward the Catholic area. Others talked to a man in a parked running car. One stood out, tall with long hair and a leather jacket. Even as a child, I sensed something was wrong. My dad's demeanor changed to something quieter, more serious. He grew up in Belfast during the worst years and knew the signs. We weren't walking toward them. We crossed right and continued. Then a woman approached us. Middle-aged, short red hair. She made a direct line for us. She seemed nervous. She immediately started asking my dad questions. Who he was, where we were from, trying to sound casual and failing. My whole body tensed with fear. It felt like a horror movie, like we were outsiders in a town hiding something. I imagined my dad getting hurt, even dying, and me screaming and helpless. I was sweating so much I could barely hold his hand. She was clearly monitoring foot traffic, probably part of what was happening around the corner. My dad kept calm and answered her questions without revealing anything. He said we were from a mixed area and acted annoyed about it, implying he didn't like living around Catholics. He never said it outright, but it was enough. She asked about me, and I gave the fake name. I must have looked terrified. My dad ended the conversation quickly and started walking away with me. She didn't move. She just stared at us. I looked back after 30 seconds and saw her heading toward the group of men. We rounded a corner and came to a long, steep path leading down to the library. One side had a fence, the other a row of houses. It felt like a trap. I didn't know if we should go forward or turn back. Halfway down, we realized we were being followed. My dad told me to run ahead and check if the library was open. I hesitated, but he said it was okay. I looked back. It was the tall man in the leather jacket. I ran down, heart pounding, expecting to hear gunfire. The door was open, so I ran back. As I returned, I saw the man had turned and was walking away. My dad looked calm but tense. He told me he'd turn to face the man once I was far enough ahead. He was ready for a confrontation, but when he turned, the guy put his head down and walked away. That same afternoon, a Catholic taxi driver was murdered on that street. I had sensed it, that something terrible was coming. When the news aired, I realized we had walked straight into the planning of that crime. I could probably have identified the woman and the man in the leather jacket if asked, but that wasn't going to happen. No way my dad would have gone to the police and put us at risk by testifying against a terrorist group. Story 11. Being fully homeless for a period. A lot of people think homeless means a person living on the streets, but it can also mean couch surfing or staying with relatives. That was usually my situation, with occasional rented homes on short-term leases that I would eventually be unable to afford. But then, for about a week, I was literally homeless, sleeping on the streets and trying to find cover when it rained. I didn't have much more than a few coats and mostly slept in tennis huts at my local public park. It was terrifying, to be honest, and I reached a point where I felt like giving up entirely. I just wanted it to end. There is a happy ending, though. I've been married and a homeowner for a while now, and I'll never be in that position again. Story 12. When I was younger, I experienced a traumatic event involving two strangers who offered me a ride home from school. It happened years ago, but the memory still affects me deeply. I recently shared my story again online, asking for advice about filing a report. Unfortunately, I was told that it might not lead anywhere since the incident happened a long time ago, and I don't know the identities of those involved or the exact location. But here's what happened. I was walking home from school when a car pulled up beside me. Inside was a man and a woman who seemed kind and offered me a ride. Since they were a couple and appeared friendly, I felt safe enough to accept. Once I got in, their attitude changed. They told me they needed to stop by their house quickly. During the ride, they whispered to each other, and I couldn't hear what they were saying. When we got to the house, they asked me to come inside. I knew something wasn't right, but I was scared and didn't say no. Once inside, the situation quickly became overwhelming. The woman suddenly became aggressive, and they both restrained me. I was frightened, crying, and begging them to let me go. But they ignored me. The situation escalated to a deeply traumatic level. I felt powerless and violated. Afterwards, they told me to put my clothes back on and walk out to the car. I followed their orders because I was terrified. The woman made a cruel joke about what had happened, laughing at the state I was in. I wrapped my jacket around myself to hide my injuries. They drove me for a while without saying a word, and then told me to get out of the car. No threats, nothing, just indifference. I wandered to a wooded area nearby and sat in silence. The pain, both physical and emotional, was overwhelming. I couldn't cry at first. I was frozen in shock. Eventually, I broke down. I cried because of what happened, but also because I realized I had no one to go to. My home life wasn't safe. I was already facing emotional and physical mistreatment there. I knew I'd be blamed, so I kept it to myself. I had no friends, no one I could talk to. I felt completely alone. To this day, I'm afraid to tell people in person. I worry they'll see me differently because I'm a male survivor. I still wonder if those two ever face consequences or if they hurt anyone else. It might be too late for legal action, but I keep hoping. I lived near the state border back then, and part of me wonders if federal agencies might care. But I honestly don't know where to begin. Story 13. My best friend growing up had an aunt who was the sweetest woman, like your stereotypical, genuinely devout Christian who just wanted to be kind to everyone and help people. She volunteered to support the homeless when she wasn't working in the office at her church. Every weekend, she would give me and my friend $5 each to pick up cigarette butts on the block, and then she'd also feed us and give us candy. She was simply one of the best people you could ever know. Genuinely so. She started dating a man from her church who said he was drawn to how beautiful she was on the inside as much as the outside. But after a few months, he decided that her kindness toward others, especially toward men, meant she was cheating on him. The same kindness he originally said made him fall for her. So how did this obviously reasonable man react? He waited outside her house for her to get home from work one day, forced her to the ground, and ended her life in front of her townhouse in the middle of the afternoon. He then sat with her, holding her, while he waited for the police. He told them she deserved a broken heart. just like she had broken his. That story and the trial that followed was in the news for a while. He ended up getting something like 60 years in prison, and since he was already fairly old at the time, it was essentially a life sentence. Story 14. I can't remember exactly how old I was. Definitely not older than 10 or younger than 8. But even now, I'm still traumatized. As a black man growing up in the mid-50s through the 60s, my dad endured a lot of abuse both at home and in the outside world. He ended up joining the Vietnam War right out of high school. Because of everything he went through, he developed serious drinking and drug issues, which I didn't fully understand as a child. As you can probably guess, this led to him becoming abusive, mostly toward my mom. I've blocked out much of my childhood, but there are a couple of nights I'll never forget. For some context, I was the youngest sibling, named after him before I later changed it, and I didn't endure as much of the physical abuse as my siblings. I stayed quiet and tried to avoid conflict. One night, which started out as a typical Saturday, my siblings and I were watching TV. My dad was out drinking with his brother, and my mom was across the street enjoying a visit with a neighbor. A few weeks earlier, my dad had gotten injured at work and was on strong pain pills. Combined with alcohol and possible drug use, it led to what happened next. My parents both came home and started arguing loudly. My dad accused my mom of cheating. We had a big glass table in the living room, and he slammed his fists on it so hard that it shattered. Things got physical after that. He began attacking my mom. She fought back while my brother and I just stood there crying and begging them to stop. At one point, my 13-year-old sister jumped on him, and he tossed her into a door, breaking it. My dad's brother, who was elderly, was trying to calm him down, but nothing was working. Eventually, my dad walked out, and my mom gathered us on the couch to comfort us. We thought it was over. But then my dad came back in, pouring liquid over us. It was gasoline. We didn't even realize it until he poured a line of it outside the front door and started trying to light it. His lighter wasn't working, and I'm still thankful for that. My sister ran out the back door to another relative's house a few blocks away. That uncle rushed back and was able to stop him. When my dad came back in, I remember grabbing him and crying, telling him I had gas in my eyes. I think that broke him out of whatever state he was in. He began apologizing, checking if I was hurt, and then ran off. The worst part isn't that my mom didn't press charges or that he only spent a weekend in jail. It's that he doesn't remember any of it, and I think about it almost every day. I still have a relationship with him, though it's strained. He's completely sober now and a wonderful grandparent to my siblings' kids, but he's also the reason I don't think I'll ever have children. Story 15. When I was younger, I had a bunk bed. I slept on the top, and my brother slept on the bottom. One summer morning, I was feeling extremely lazy and decided to stay in bed for a while. I was the only one in the room. For some reason, I always slept with the door at my back, so I couldn't see who entered unless I sat up and turned around. That morning, I felt someone touching me. I thought it was my little sister playing around, so I told her to cut it out. No response. A few minutes later, I told her to leave my room. Still no response, and the door had remained closed the entire time. I figured she must be hiding under the bed, so I jumped down to check and kick her out. Oddly enough, no one was there. To this day, I don't know who or what touched me, but it felt real. It had weight to it. I asked everyone in the house if they'd come into my room, but they all said no. It's been 12 years, and I still think about it. Story 16. When I was 11 or 12, one of my classmates moved out of the area, but he invited some of us to visit him for his birthday later that year. He had made a new friend at his new school and invited him to the get-together as well. We were exploring around his house, and my friend and his new friend said we should go check out the rope swing in the woods nearby. We hiked back on a little trail and found the rope swing, which was just a long rope with a piece of wood tied to the end. It looked like if you used it, you'd swing pretty far over a steep wooded hillside. They asked who wanted to try it, and normally I'd take risks and do stuff like that, but it just seemed dangerous to me. So I said I might go, but I wouldn't be the first. My friend's new friend said he would go on the rope swing. Still, to this day, I don't know if they had used it before or if he was just trying to impress us. He swung way out, and at the peak of his swing, one hand slipped off the wooden handle and then the other. For a split second, I thought, oh, maybe there's a safe place to land, and he meant to do that. But there wasn't. He hit a fallen tree and then pitched forward, sliding several feet across some rocks. He passed away instantly. Of course, we didn't realize that right away. We had to climb down the hill to try to help him. His lips were already blue when we got there. Story 17. When I was about 8, I was deep in the woods at my uncle's house. The parents had gone out, and the 5 kids, ages 4 to 14, stayed home. We were playing hide and seek inside the house with all the lights off. There weren't any street lights or anything around, so it was completely dark. Base was in the living room, and I decided to hide nearby so I could make it to base quickly. My brother, who was 11, was it. He started his countdown, and I was just a couple of feet away from him when a lightning strike lit up the room, and we both looked toward the window. We were shocked to see the outline of a man standing outside trying to peer in. We started whispering to each other, and on the next lightning flash, we saw the man walking toward the front door. My brother Ben ran to lock the door, I know, different time and place, and made it just as the man started rattling the handle. Ben turned on the lights, probably to let the guy know someone was home, and shouted for me to lock the other doors. I ran and locked the kitchen door, then went to the sliding glass door at the back of the house. Just as I was locking it, the man was suddenly there, standing on the other side of the glass. I froze. Ben calmly told me to close the curtain. I focused on his voice and did what he said. My uncle owns guns, but his son was away on a hunting trip, so all we could find was a BB gun that looked like a real rifle. Ben stepped onto the porch with it, hoping to scare the guy off and make him think we were armed. They always had issues with the phone. This was a long time ago and they had a party line, so we couldn't make a call. We tried reaching someone through my uncle's CB radio, but no one answered. Eventually, an older cousin, who was only about 15, showed up. We thought an adult had arrived and that we were safe. That calmed us down and things slowly went back to normal. But to this day, I don't think I've ever had a creepier moment than looking up at that window and seeing someone staring back at me. Story 18. I was at my friend's house for the night to celebrate his birthday. We were 10. We wanted to camp outside the house on the lawn, so we set up tents and separated the girls and boys. We stayed up past midnight just playing board games and talking when the girls started trying to scare us by slapping the tent. We went out to check, and all we could hear was laughing from the girls' tent, so we did the exact same. This went on for about 20 minutes, then everyone decided to go to bed. We were almost asleep when we heard the girls scream. They thought we were pushing on the tent again, but we weren't. Then the same thing happened to us. We just brushed it off, thinking the girls were getting back at us for something we didn't do. But then at the exact same time, both our tents started caving in, like something was pushing from all directions. We all screamed and ran inside. From that point on, we were terrified, constantly hearing noises like knocking on walls and footsteps, etc. I don't remember how long it lasted, but we eventually passed out and woke up the next morning trying to figure out an explanation for the tents and the noises. But we couldn't. Everything about that night didn't add up to any conclusion we came to. A couple of side points. My friend lived on a farm in the middle of nowhere, so it's unlikely it was people messing with us. The farmhouse is also on a hill with no trees nearby, so it couldn't have been wild animals pushing on the roof. My friend's parents are religious and always go to bed at the same time every night. Sure, they could have messed with us, but it didn't seem right. My friend was also the oldest child in his family, so he didn't have any older siblings to prank us. I still have questions about that day, and it still puzzles me 12 years later. But it was definitely one of the scariest experiences of my life. Story 19. I almost lost my leg to cellulitis. I'm prone to eczema, which sometimes turns into a small infection, but more often than not goes away with regular washing. When I saw the white bumps on the back of my leg, I figured I was in for another bout of eczema. Thought nothing of it. When it developed, it looked like 3 pea-sized scabs that drained when irritated. I thought it was odd, but I put a bandage on all 3. After removing it, the skin ripped off on the surface and the scabs spread, draining even more. Over the course of 6 months, the scab grew larger, and the drainage got worse. I finally had enough, called my doctor, and explained what was going on. I was given some hydrocortisone and thought that was the end of it. But I was wrong. During the 6th month, my mom noticed I was limping and asked to look at my leg. She panicked and insisted I go to a hospital. I was reluctant to go over something I thought I could treat myself. She pleaded with me again the next day, so I went. The doctor who examined my leg told me it was severely infected and that I was lucky I came in when I did. If I had waited another month, I might have lost the leg. It took about a month to heal, and I still have a massive scar with small keloids. I'll never let something like that go untreated for so long again. Story 20. So, in my city, there's a canal. There are several bridges crossing it, one being a smaller, openable metal bridge for bikes and pedestrians. It's like a skeleton of iron bars with a wooden path in the middle. That said, there are lots of large gaps in it. When I was young, don't remember the exact age, but under 10, I was biking with my parents and siblings along the canal and about to cross that bridge. Me and my brother went first, a little too close to each other, which resulted in us colliding and falling to the side on our bikes. My brother fell on the path, but I was too close to the edge and fell through one of the gaps. The bridge itself was only about a meter above the water, and this was near the edge. But I just remember losing control, splashing into the cold, dark water, and fighting for dear life. I was a kid. I couldn't swim. Somehow, I managed to grab one of the metal bars and held on to it. Panic. That's the only way to describe what I was feeling. All of this happened in a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Suddenly, I heard a splash and felt my dad beside me in the water, lifting me up. And that was it. I was so embarrassed. To this day, I'm 19 now. I've only told a handful of people about it. Story 21. I was out at a cottage in the woods with my friends, all females. We arrived super late at night, and about an hour into being there, the power went out due to a crazy storm that hit us. Our phones were almost dead from hours of navigation to get to the cabin. We tried to make the best of the situation. Then we heard something walking along the sides of the house. I went to investigate by looking outside the windows since the front door was all glass. I didn't see anything and turned around to assure my friends nothing was there. At that moment, with my back turned, something slapped the glass behind me. We barricaded ourselves in the bedroom and called 911 with what little battery we had left. I grabbed a knife and stood guard, facing the bedroom door while my friends stayed on the bed. We kept hearing something rummaging outside in the pitch black. I used my last battery power to send our location and outfit descriptions to loved ones and took a picture of us, just in case something bad happened. When police arrived, they searched the perimeter and said they didn't find anything. They thought it was probably an animal. Still, I was absolutely terrified in the moment. Story 22. We were on vacation at Lake Tahoe, and long story short, a winding road leads you down to the lake. In the distance, we saw the same tree we had seen in old pictures of our dad from when we were kids. We started running toward it. Me, my older and younger brother, my sister, and my cousin were all there. But my cousin and sister stayed behind. My brother and I walked right to the edge of the water, and as you may know, Lake Tahoe is one of the clearest lakes in the world. You can see all the way to the bottom. Twigs, roots, everything. My younger brother watched from a distance as we stepped onto this huge, long, thick, rotting log. I asked my brother if I could jump off it, and he said maybe. He remembered the water near the bank hadn't felt too cold, so he said sure. I looked down at the bottom of the lake and started counting. 1, 2, 3. I hesitated, but jumped. I was underwater for a moment, and it felt refreshingly cold. I started swimming to stay afloat, but all of a sudden, I began to sink. I gasped and panicked and screamed my brother's name. I saw the panic in his eyes as he tried to decide whether to jump in and risk both of us drowning. I managed to swim over and grab onto the branches of the tree, trying to stay afloat. Everything felt numb, and I was in shock. He helped pull me up and get off the log. I was shaking and freezing. My legs and parts of my stomach were scratched, bleeding, and starting to bruise badly. I had hit the bottom and fallen debris had cut me on impact. On the walk back, we talked about what happened, and I suddenly burst out sobbing. For a moment, I genuinely thought that maybe everything from then on was just my brain distracting me from the fact that I had died drowning. I got home, took a shower, and since then, I can't stand being near that lake. Story 23. Growing up, the city I lived in had a huge Halloween cornfield attraction with several haunted houses. It was always crazy busy and crowded. When I was about 12 years old, a group of my friends made plans to go one night. My parents were pretty strict and always anxious about me going places. They said I absolutely couldn't go unless the group was accompanied by parents. I lied and said there would be parents, when in reality it was just 6 of us 12-year-olds. When we arrived, I was nervous because I had never really lied to my parents before. The night was going well until I had to use the bathroom. The cornfield only had porta potties, so I went while my friends waited outside. But when I came out, they were gone. I walked around, called out for them, but couldn't find them anywhere. I started panicking and crying. A police officer approached me and asked what was wrong. I explained I couldn't find my friends, and he took my hand and said we could go to the ticket booth so they could make an announcement over a loudspeaker for my friends to meet me. However, he said we had to go back to his squad car first to let another officer know. As I started walking with him through the parking lot, I had an oddly specific memory. A few days earlier, my dad had told me about a little girl who had been kidnapped by someone impersonating a police officer. He told me to always be cautious, even with people claiming to be police. He said to always ask for a badge and to ask them to call my parents. I stopped walking and nervously said, "I'm sorry, this might sound silly, but my dad told me I should ask to see a police officer's badge and to ask them to call my parents." As soon as I said it, the man's face went pale. He let go of my hand and took off running. I eventually called my parents. They came to pick me up and found the real officers nearby. I told them what happened, and they explained that what the man said wasn't protocol at all. The attraction didn't even have a loudspeaker for announcements. We filed a police report. I'm pretty sure I could have been kidnapped that night. Story 24. I had salmonella as a kid. I spent a week at home with what we thought was the flu before finally going to the doctor. I ended up spending a week at my local hospital, having all kinds of different medications pumped into me. Then came a week at the children's hospital where they wanted to make sure my insides hadn't turned to mush. I had a fever of 104.0 degrees Fahrenheit and was hallucinating. Crickets in the walls and everything. After that, I had another week at home with awful stomach cramps as my gut tried to adjust to solid foods again. Fun times. A few years later, my family moved to Ottawa. One day we went for a walk around the Parliament buildings to do some sightseeing. My family was a little ahead of me when someone suddenly grabbed me from behind and pulled me back, away from the group. I was yelling for my mom, absolutely terrified, as a group of Asian tourists dragged me into the middle of them to be part of their group photo. They let me go afterward. My mom still jokes about how she turned around and saw all these people surrounding me, snapping pictures. She said they probably just wanted a photo with a little blonde Canadian, and now I might be in someone's vacation brochure somewhere. Story 25. I was born and raised in the southern U.S., but I decided to move to Minnesota back in the early 2000s. I moved up there with the original intent of going to the University of Minnesota, since they supposedly had a good atmospheric science program. I also knew people in the state, no one in Oklahoma, or I might have gone there. I ended up not going to college and just lived with friends. I started dating a Canadian girl, and my home was about a 4-hour drive from the border up in the Minnesota Arrowhead. It was just after Christmas that year, and I was heading back after spending time with my then-girlfriend. It was around dusk when I left. Her house was an hour from the border. I crossed back with no problem and started driving down Highway 61 like I had done dozens of times before. For those who don't know, this highway runs right along Lake Superior and is mostly traveled late at night by locals in small towns and truckers going between Duluth, Shara Superior, and Thunder Bay. The weather was clear, the roads were dry, and I was cruising at 60 miles per hour like usual. That was, until I hit a patch of black ice. I completely lost control and slid off the highway. I didn't know if I'd end up in the woods on one side or in the partially frozen Lake Superior on the other. Luckily, I veered toward the woods, barrel rolled a few times, and landed on my wheels. I was in a shallow ravine, so my car wasn't easily visible unless someone was specifically looking for it. The temperature was in the single digits. This was before cell phones were common, and there was no signal out there anyway. I was alone, freezing, and stranded on a deserted highway near a hidden patch of black ice that could easily cause another accident. I don't know how long I was out there, but eventually a local found me and took me to the hospital. I somehow escaped with only a few cuts and bruises, and aside from being freezing, I was okay. The state police officer who arrived at the crash site told me that by all accounts I should have died. If not from the crash itself, then from the cold. I had no way of contacting my friends or girlfriend, and I was at least 4 hours from home. The local who found me, his name was John, offered me a place to stay until someone could come get me. I stayed with him for 3 days until a friend from Duluth came to pick me up. John passed away in 2018 at the age of 70. I had long since moved back to the South, but we stayed in touch through email. After the crash, I was in a place I didn't know in the dark, on a quiet road in the middle of winter, freezing. Every passing moment without headlights felt like a countdown. I truly thought I was going to freeze to death. But then John came along and literally saved my life. And for that, I'll be forever grateful. Story 26. I was with my wife and kids by New Smyrna Beach, Florida, and I felt pretty comfortable in the water because I grew up near there. It was my home beach as a kid. I went out around 7 a.m. to take some pictures of the waves by myself. If you know this beach, a sandbar develops about 60 yards offshore that you have to swim out to. The water is only about shoulder deep until you get to the sandbar, where it's about waist high. I was out there taking pictures alone, and about 8 feet behind me I noticed a big black object in the water. It was so large I thought it was a manatee at first. Then I realized it was a bull shark and it was checking me out. Nobody else was out there. No surfboard, just me and a tiny camera. I faced the shark since that's what you're supposed to do, and eventually it turned and swam away. At that point, I had to decide whether to swim back quickly or stay calm and move slowly. I yelled toward the beach, kind of a panic yell, for my wife to watch me, though she had no idea what was going on. I then did the quietest, fastest freestyle swim of my life, covering those 60 yards back to shore. Scariest minutes of my life. I don't have an intense fear of sharks, but that moment, seeing a big bull shark in dark, murky water, definitely changed how I feel about swimming alone out there. Story 27. About 8 years ago, I was taking my sister's boyfriend home after we had all gone out to see a movie. It was really late, around 1 a.m., and we were on a dark country road. I was starting to feel really sleepy and drowsy when I saw a black hooded figure walking across the road. I saw it too late and thought I was going to hit it, but just like that, it vanished, almost like it was made of smoke. At first I thought, man, I'm hallucinating because I'm so tired. Then my sister's boyfriend said, "Whoa, what was that?" And that's when the hair on the back of my neck stood up. He saw the exact same thing. I instantly regretted offering to take him home, because now I had to drive back through that same stretch, alone. After I dropped him off, I drove fast through that old country road. I don't know what we saw that night, but ever since, I really hate driving those roads late at night. Story 28. Many years ago, I was out Christmas shopping and got into a car accident. I was in a turn lane, slowing down to go left when another car pulled out in front of me. I ended up hitting the driver's side door with the front of my car. After shaking off the shock, I made sure the people in the other vehicle were okay. They called the police, and an accident report was written up. Neither vehicle was drivable afterward. The men in the other car were wearing suits and were picked up shortly after by more men in suits in a black van. I was left standing with the officer who told me the accident was my fault, but I wouldn't be given a ticket because there was no proof. I was angry, especially because the officer didn't even ask for my version of events. She only spoke to the men in the other vehicle. She then told me those men were government agents. I couldn't help myself. I mouthed off a bit, asking if I was being blamed because they were who they were and I was just a kid. She sternly told me that wasn't the case, then left me alone, freezing in a parking lot while I waited for my ride. My ride took me to the body shop where both vehicles had been taken so I could get my belongings out of my car. While I was there, I took a bunch of photos of both vehicles. When I called my insurance company later and explained the situation, the agent said, "We're not going to be intimidated." That gave me a bit of comfort. I mentioned I had taken photos, and he asked for them. I sent them in. A week or so passed with no updates. When I finally called my agent, he said the photos I sent actually proved I was at fault. I was shocked. He said based on the position of the damage, it looked like the other car was stopped, and I had just driven straight into it. I was furious at the implication that I had been speeding and careless. I started suspecting the other party had influenced my agent's decision. I had no choice but to go along with it. But that's when things got worse. Government agents showed up at my home, wanting to question me about the crash. I politely declined. Then one day at work, the same two men from the accident randomly showed up at my job. It was too much of a coincidence. They weren't there to shop. It really started to shake me. I became paranoid. My boss even asked me if I'd had run-ins with the bureau. When I asked why, he said someone had called asking questions about me. Almost a year later, I got another call from my insurance agent. He had more questions and said the bureau was looking into a possible whiplash claim. He asked if I wanted to make a statement. I declined again. That whole experience left a bitter taste in my mouth. Before this, I believed that if you did nothing wrong, you had nothing to fear. But now I know, even if you're innocent, the truth can be twisted to fit someone else's narrative. That experience gave me a lasting fear of Big Brother, and it changed how I see the world. Story 29. One day while my little sister and I were playing in our backyard, I was trying to teach her how to do a front flip. She was 7 at the time and absolutely obsessed with gymnastics. I told her she needed to get up in the air before trying to flip. Well, she did, but ended up landing on her head. My mom had seen what happened and was heading outside to check on her. My sister got off the trampoline, walked about 10 feet, and then suddenly fell flat on the ground. I looked over at her and immediately started to panic. I ran over and flipped her over. She wasn't moving. All I heard was an exhale, and then nothing. I started freaking out, thinking she had just died right in front of me. But my mom was quick. She rushed over, picked her up, and took her inside. Eventually, my sister woke up and started moving again as we brought her in. I was beyond relieved. She did have a bloody nose, though. The next day, we were trying to figure out what had happened and why she had passed out. My mom thought maybe when she fell and hit the ground, she hit her head hard enough to knock herself out. Fast forward about 5 years, I still have no idea what really happened that day. And yes, my sister is completely fine now, thank goodness. Story 30. I worked in a hospital in semi-rural southern Africa, back during the apartheid era. One night, due to some issues in the lab, I had to go into work around midnight. As I approached the main road leading into the township where the hospital was located, I encountered a roadblock. About a dozen soldiers flagging down cars. All of them were armed with automatic rifles and very obviously staggeringly drunk. They clearly weren't expecting to see a white face, and for some reason, I must have seemed like a threat. As I rolled down the window to speak, 2 rifle barrels were immediately thrust into the car, pointed directly at my face. The man in charge was almost incoherently drunk. I could barely understand his slurred words and shouting. I tried to stay calm, be polite, and avoid doing anything that might provoke them. I had my hospital ID badge on the dashboard. I managed to convince him to pick it up and look at it. I kept my hands up and didn't make a single move unless told to. It was extremely tense. Then one of his colleagues, possibly a little more sober, came over, looked at the ID and started shouting, "Doctor, doctor!" Everything de-escalated after that, and they let me go on my way. The funny part? I'm not a doctor. The ID badge had mistakenly listed the title doctor before my name, and I was actually waiting for a corrected one to arrive. But honestly, I think that mistake might have saved me that night. Story 31. I was about 20 years old and still lived with my parents and younger siblings. I was watching TV, and my sister, who was around 16 at the time, came in, ripped the remote from my hand, and changed the channel. She's about 5 inches taller than me, and has always had a dominant personality. So instead of fighting back and getting into trouble, because somehow I'd end up being the one punished for being mean to my baby sister, I let her watch what she wanted. About 10 minutes before the show ended, she got up, left the room, and shut herself in her bedroom. That show ended, then a new episode started and ended, and she still hadn't come back. After watching 45 minutes of something I didn't care about, I finally changed the channel back. Maybe 15 or 20 minutes later, she came back and told me to switch it back to her show. I said no. It had ended, and she had left for nearly an hour. She told me again, but this time it was in a guttural scream. Her eyes looked dark, and it felt like she was trying to set me on fire with her stare. I said no again. She stormed off, stomping so hard that the furniture and picture frames shook. Then she went into the kitchen and came back holding a steak knife. As she entered the living room, she told me I was going to pay. She started chasing me in circles around the coffee table. I made a dash for my bedroom, slammed the door shut, and threw myself against it. We lived in a very rural area, and I didn't have enough cell service to call 911, and I couldn't grab the landline in time. The door had one of those simple, child-safe locks that could be opened from the outside with a coin, so my body was the only thing keeping her out. She rattled the doorknob and told me to open the door so she could hurt me. I stayed put. Eventually, she gave up and walked away. I didn't leave my room until my parents came home. I told them what happened, but they brushed it off, as always. I obsessed over that moment for weeks. How could I have handled it differently? But there was no reasoning with her. When she was angry, she lost control. That hasn't changed, even now that we're adults. A few weeks or months later, it happened again. She took the remote, changed the channel, left before her show ended, and came back way after I had changed it back. She grabbed the same knife and came after me again. But this time, instead of running to my room, I ran to the kitchen and grabbed the largest cleaver from the knife block. It was always razor sharp, even though nobody used it except my dad, who liked to keep it sharpened. She came after me but froze when I turned around with a blade 3 times the size of hers. With the same fire in her eyes, she demanded I put it down. I said no. She repeated herself and I shouted, "Come make me!" We stared at each other for what felt like a full minute. Then she turned around, walked out of the kitchen, and went back to her room. She was strangely calm. I don't remember if she put the knife down as she passed, but I kept the cleaver with me while I watched TV. I might have put it away before my parents came home. I honestly don't remember. But she never came at me with a knife again. Key words, with a knife. It wasn't just because of this incident, but due to her behavior in general that I was eventually diagnosed with complex PTSD. Some family members still tell me we both need to grow up and that I should try to have a relationship with her. But none of them have ever been chased with a knife over a TV remote. I'm lucky now that a few members of the family have seen what she's really like and are finally on my side. Story 32. This probably sounds incredibly silly compared to other people's stories, but I once spent an entire night convinced my mom had died. She'd gone on her first date with my now stepdad, and I was living about 200 miles away at the time. I had just asked her to text me when she got home. She didn't. Her WhatsApp showed her last active at the same time as her last message to me. The message I sent after that hadn't been seen. She hadn't replied to her friends either, who had also checked in. I became convinced something had happened, that my stepdad had done something horrible, and that I was about to be featured on a true crime podcast telling the story. She replied the next morning after waking up to dozens of texts and missed calls from me and several of her friends. Turns out her landline had gone down, which disabled her Wi-Fi. She had sent WhatsApp messages when she got home, but they never went through. She assumed they had, left her phone downstairs and went to bed, completely unaware that people were panicking and trying to contact her all night. I tried to ground her for that scare, but apparently it doesn't work that way when it's your mom. Story 33. I moved into a new house in January. By July, I started feeling sick. By early August, I couldn't stop coughing and could barely function. The doctor thought it was pneumonia and gave me strong antibiotics. He warned me that if I got worse, I needed to go to the emergency room because there was a particularly bad strain going around. I spent 2 days sleeping in my recliner chair downstairs because I couldn't stop coughing. By the end of the second day, I felt so ill that I called an ambulance. When they arrived, one of the paramedics commented that it smelled really gassy inside. I told them I'd had the heater going nonstop for 2 days. They took me to the hospital, ran tests and a chest x-ray. They didn't find anything major and discharged me. I remember walking home at 1 a.m., feeling like I was losing control of my bladder. I took a shower upstairs, had to sit down from feeling so weak, and eventually went to bed. The next day was sunny, so I opened the windows and started cleaning. I caught a strange whiff of something and decided to call a plumber. They discovered a gas leak. When the gas line was installed, someone had used a water fitting instead of a gas fitting, and it had slowly loosened over the years. It was now almost fully open. Worse, the connection had been illegally installed in an inaccessible area of the kitchen, so gas had been seeping out for who knows how long. The only reason the house hadn't exploded was sheer luck. Looking back, I know if I hadn't gone to the hospital that night and had slept downstairs again, I wouldn't have woken up. I was later diagnosed with chemical pneumonia and have permanent scarring on my lungs. I'm incredibly grateful to that doctor who scared me about pneumonia, because that fear may have saved my life. Story 34. I was riding my motorcycle through South Carolina on the interstate. I was about 75 feet behind 3 cars. 2 were in the left lane, passing one on the right, and I was behind them. As the second car went to pass, it suddenly had a mechanical malfunction and started swerving right and left. It hit the car it was passing, then slammed into the inner guardrail posts, veered again, and flipped sideways into the opposite lanes of traffic. Debris flew everywhere, on the road, in the air. As I rode through the crash zone, a piece of the car's body flew about 6 feet in front of me. Another piece barely missed my head and shredded the shoulder of my leather jacket as it passed. I pulled over about 75 yards ahead and got off my bike. That's when I noticed the damage. When I took off my jacket, it was ripped about 5 inches. From the edge of my right shoulder across the entire top, I hadn't even felt it. I had thought it had missed me entirely. I still remember the woman's face, upside down, as her car flipped in front of me. I came that close to being hit and had no idea until I took my jacket off. Story 35. One day I was at the beach and my friend, who was lifeguarding, asked if I wanted to swim out to the buoy about 200 yards away. As a former competitive swimmer, that distance was nothing, basically just part of a warm-up. So I said sure, and off we went. But there were some variables I hadn't considered. First, the ocean was freezing. Water that cold literally takes your breath away. Second, I didn't have goggles, so I had to swim with my head up the whole time, which threw off my rhythm and made everything more exhausting. And third, I later found out I have exercise-induced asthma, so I started running out of breath and energy quickly. I finally reached the buoy, where I met up with my friend and another lifeguard. We treaded water and chatted for a bit. Then my friend headed back, and I followed soon after. That's when it hit me. My body was exhausted, and I couldn't catch my breath. I was 200 yards out, with nothing under me, and panic started to set in. I floated on my back, tried side stroking. Nothing was helping. The panic intensified. I had to tell myself that if I panicked, I was done. I thought about waving to the lifeguards, but I was too embarrassed to cause a scene. I kept trying to calm down and push forward. The water was completely calm, but I kept convincing myself I was being pulled further out. Somehow I made it back. My friend came out to meet me and was confused by how exhausted I was. Later I read that things like floating on your back and switching strokes are signs of a swimmer in distress. Another eerie detail? My mom had a strong gut feeling that day that I was in danger. This was 15 years ago, and I still haven't gone back into the ocean. Story 36. This happened back in 2013. I've always had dreams about being back in school, and this night was no different. In the dream, I was in a chemistry lab, and the Bunsen burners were on. When I woke up, I could still smell this awful burning scent. I jumped out of bed, thinking my uncle must have been burning something while cooking. We met up in the kitchen with the same question. He said he'd heard a crackling noise from his room and thought maybe it was hailing. We both walked outside and saw the house was on fire. He grabbed the hose, and I ran back upstairs to grab my phone and call 911. I knew we had a fire extinguisher downstairs, so I opened the door to grab it. My cat Bailey ran out and straight back upstairs to my bedroom. At this point, the police were on their way, but there were no firefighters yet. Everyone in our area was volunteer, and they were already out on other calls. It took at least 30 minutes before help arrived. My other uncle, who used to be on the fire department, showed up. I kept asking him if they had found Bailey. From the outside, the house didn't look too bad. We thought we had knocked the fire out, but it had traveled into the roof and kept burning. My room was partially in the roof, and my closet was right next to the crawl space attic. About an hour into the ordeal, my uncle came up to me and told me Bailey didn't make it. I punched him in the chest, thinking he was joking. He had a dark sense of humor sometimes, but he wasn't joking. I screamed so loud, I'm pretty sure the entire neighborhood heard me. We were eventually allowed back in to retrieve anything salvageable. The upstairs bedrooms and bathroom had taken the worst of the fire, smoke, and water damage. My heart still aches wondering if Bailey had been waiting for me to come save him. Story 37. Starting around age 12 and lasting into my early 20s, I saw and heard what I can only describe as shadows. Not all the time, but a few times a week, I'd see dark, human-like figures, walking, standing still, even talking to each other. It happened mostly at night, but also sometimes in daylight. Every time I'd get that bone-deep feeling like my hair was standing on end. One night, I woke up suddenly with a horrible feeling. I usually slept with a light on for comfort, but the light looked strange, too red. I looked around and felt like something was watching me. My bed was against the far wall, and when I looked to my right, there was a shadow figure standing against the wall. It was flat, like black paper, but perfectly visible. As I stared, it peeled off the wall and leaned over my bed, emitting the most horrifying screech I've ever heard. I bolted out of bed and ran to the door, but the knob wouldn't turn. I turned around. Nothing was there anymore. Then, just like that, the door opened easily. I ran downstairs crying and curled up on the floor of my parents' room.